I saw the truth during my near-death experience, and what Allah told me made me leave Islam forever. You may think that the Muslim faith is unshakable, but what I experienced completely changed my perspective. At 42, my life seemed like an unqualified success. I had everything a man could want. Living in a luxurious Manhattan apartment, with a wonderful family and a successful career as an entrepreneur, I was the epitome of triumph. Furthermore, I had always prided myself on being a devout Muslim. I attended prayers at the mosque, observed the Ramadan fast, and gave generously to charity. But behind this facade of perfection lay a spiritual poverty that I was unwilling to admit. My business success did not bring me the spiritual fulfillment I had hoped for. For years, I followed the Islamic faith because I was told it was the right path, the path to paradise. Yet something inside me felt disconnected. I would perform the rituals, but my soul felt empty, as if I was just going through the motions, without truly feeling the presence of Allah in my daily life. This tension grew with each passing year, but I suppressed it. I was a practical man, and dealing with my spiritual life seemed secondary to the daily pressures of work. Spirituality took a back seat. I never imagined that this neglect would lead me to such a dramatic crossroads. One winter morning, on my way back from a business meeting, I was in a serious accident on the highway. My car skidded on an icy patch, colliding violently with another vehicle. It all happened in seconds, but the impact was brutal. I remember hearing the sound of metal twisting, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was on the operating table, hearing distant voices, machines beeping, and a sense of urgency all around me. My heart stopped for a few minutes, and that was when my near-death experience began. I felt my soul being pulled out of my body. I saw myself lying on the table, the doctors and nurses working frantically to save me. But for some reason, I didn't feel fear. Instead, a sense of peace washed over me. I was pulled away from the hospital to a place that seemed outside of time and space. It was an intense light that enveloped me, but at the same time, it felt welcoming. I was being led to something greater, something that seemed beyond human comprehension. In that moment, I knew I was on a threshold between life and death. Everything I believed in was about to be challenged. Doubt and confusion washed over me. But before I could reflect, I knew I was not alone. This sense of peace would not last long. Soon, I realized that an immense presence was before me. It was not a figure, it had no definite shape, but it was as if the entire space around me was filled with a force that I knew, deep down in my soul, was Allah. The presence was overwhelming and caused all the success, all the confidence that I had in my worldly life, to dissipate like dust in the wind. It was the beginning of something that I could never have imagined. I found myself in what I can only describe as a dimension of pure light, an experience that defied all earthly concepts. This light was not blinding, but rather welcoming, carrying a sense of immensity and power. I knew with every fiber of my being that I was standing in the presence of Allah. It was not something I saw with my physical eyes, but something I felt deep within my soul. It was a presence that dominated the entire space around me, an immense force that enveloped me. Soon I realized that I wasn't just there to watch. There was something that needed to be shown to me. Suddenly, I began to see scenes from my life. It was like watching a movie, but it wasn't just any movie. It was my own life flashing before me. I saw moments from my childhood, when my parents taught me about Islam, about how I should live to please Allah. These memories were followed by scenes from my youth, when I began to drift away spiritually, prioritizing material success over my faith. But these scenes were not just random memories. They were accompanied by an overwhelming sense of truth. It was as if, for the first time, I was seeing the reality behind my actions. I saw all the times I had followed religious rituals mechanically, without true devotion. All the times I had gone to prayers at the mosque, not because I truly wanted to connect with Allah, but because it was expected of me. The contrast between what I thought I was doing and what was really happening in my soul was devastating. Then something even more profound happened. I felt sadness. It wasn't a sadness that came from Allah, but rather from within me. It was as if my own soul was mourning all that I had lost by focusing only on the material and ignoring the spiritual essence. Allah's presence was there, immense and powerful, But at the same time, it was as if he was showing me the emptiness that I had created for myself by living a life without true spiritual connection. It was at that moment that I understood. Allah was showing me that my practice of Islam, although outwardly correct, was empty. I was following the dogmas, but not with my heart. My faith was a set of rules, not a true relationship of love and devotion. And then came the final revelation. The faith you follow is soulless, because you practice it without love. This message came not in words, but in a feeling so strong that it permeated my entire being. Suddenly, everything made sense. My religious practice was not the source of my spiritual emptiness. The real problem was that I had never truly understood what it meant to have faith. It was not about following rules or fulfilling obligations, but about deep and sincere love for Allah. This revelation changed everything within me. Standing there in this divine presence, I realized that my view of faith was completely wrong, and that my life would never be the same again. As I returned from this intense insight into my own life, I felt a profound transformation taking place within me. I was still in the presence of Allah, but now there was a clarity, an understanding that I had never had before. It was not something spoken in words. Instead, it was as if the truth was being transmitted directly to my heart, with an intensity that took my breath away. The first thing I realized was how wrong my understanding of faith had always been. Up until that point, I had followed Islam in an almost mechanical way, as if performing the rituals and following the rules were enough to guarantee my salvation. But now, the presence of Allah showed me something very different. Faith, at its core, was not about dogma or external practices. It was about love, a love so pure and intense that it transcended any rules or rituals. This was the most powerful message I received. You followed your faith with pride, but without true love. These words, even unspoken, resonated deeply within me. I realized that my religious practice was, in many ways, a facade. I was doing everything expected of a devout Muslim, but without feeling a true connection to Allah. There was a huge gap between what I believed I was doing and what was really happening in my soul. As this revelation took shape, I began to see another series of visions. This time, they were not just moments in my life, but the consequences of my actions. I saw people I had hurt along the way, whether intentionally or through negligence. I saw every time I had prioritized material success over the needs of those around me. And worst of all, I saw how my mechanical faith had made me distant from both Allah and others. I felt an overwhelming guilt. It was as if each of these actions had left a permanent mark on my soul. As I watched these scenes, I realized that I was not only moving away from Allah, but also from the true purpose of life. All my material achievements, all the success I had accumulated, meant nothing compared to the spiritual loss I was experiencing. Then Allah asked me one last question, one that echoes within me to this day. What is faith if not love? This question struck me like a thunderbolt. I had always thought that faith was about obedience, about following the rules of religion. But now, standing before Allah, I realized that all of that was secondary. True faith was about a deep, loving relationship with the divine, something I had never truly experienced. This message changed me completely. Standing there in the divine presence, I realized that my life could never be the same again. Allah was not condemning me, but offering me a chance for redemption. I could not go back to living the way I had before, because now I knew what really mattered. I knew that when I returned to my body, I would have to make difficult but essential choices. I would have to leave behind the superficial faith that I had followed for so many years and seek something much deeper and truer. The impact of the revelation was so strong that for a brief moment, I thought my soul would never return to my body. Allah's presence still hovered around me, but I began to feel a tug, as if something was calling me back. Suddenly, the light that had been surrounding me began to fade. There was no goodbye, no final word. I was pulled out of that near-death experience as abruptly as I had been taken into it. I felt my body again, and with it, the physical pain and the feeling of suffocation. I was back on the operating table. I could hear the doctors and nurses rushing around me, their voices mixing with the sounds of the machines. "He's coming back," someone said. It was as if I had fallen from a great height, back to reality, but my mind was still stuck on what had just happened. The physical pain was real, but it was nothing compared to the confusion and spiritual shock that filled my mind. I spent the next few days in the hospital, recovering from my physical injuries, but my mind was elsewhere. My wife and children came to visit me, and I tried to act normal so as not to worry them. They had no idea what I had been through during those few minutes that I was dead. How could I explain what had happened? How could I put into words the magnitude of the experience? There was no way, and so at first I kept it all to myself. As my body healed, my mind found no rest. I could not forget the images, the sensations, and most of all, the message that Allah had given me. My entire life now seemed devoid of meaning. The man I had been before my accident no longer made sense. The prayers I had repeated every day, the words that had once flowed from my lips without me feeling them, now seemed hollow. My wife could tell something was different about me, but I wasn't ready to talk about it yet. When I finally got home, she suggested we go to the mosque to give thanks for my recovery. I went with her, out of habit, but once inside, as I listened to the imam's words, I realized how much my perspective had changed. Before, I would have listened to the sermon and followed the rituals without question. But now, every word seemed distant, disconnected from the truth I had experienced. I felt a growing need to share what had happened, to try to put into words the transformation I had undergone. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. My wife was a devout Muslim, as were most of the people in our community. To them, Islam was an unshakable truth. How could I explain that my once solid faith had been shattered and rebuilt in a new form? Still, the pressure inside me was too great to contain. A few days later, I sat down with my wife and tried to explain carefully what had happened. I told her about the light, the presence of Allah, and the message that my faith up until then had been empty, devoid of love. She looked at me in disbelief, as if I were delirious. I didn't blame her. I didn't know how to react to what was happening inside me either, but I knew that from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same again. Over time, my need to share my experience grew. I felt I could no longer hide the truth, even though I knew the consequences would be dire. I decided to speak to some friends from the Muslim community who had always been close to me, men with whom I had prayed and discussed religious matters for years. I believed that, as people of faith, they would understand the depth of what I had experienced. But my expectations soon proved to be wrong. When I shared my experience with the first group of friends, I was met with looks of skepticism and discomfort. They listened, but I could see on their faces that they didn't believe me. "You must be confused," one of them said. "After a trauma like yours, the mind can play tricks on you." They tried to rationalize what I described as just an illusion, a creation of my accident-damaged brain. When I mentioned the message Allah had given me about the lack of love in my religious practice, things got even worse. One of my friends became visibly angry and interrupted me. "This is blasphemy. How can you say that our faith is not based on love? You are lost." They could not accept that someone who had followed Islam for so long could question the essence of their faith. To them, I was betraying something sacred. The rejection was swift. Doors that had once been open to me began to close. Longtime friends drifted away, and before long, rumors began to spread throughout the community. People began to avoid me, and even in the mosque, I felt looks of judgment and contempt. I was being seen as someone who had strayed from the path, someone who was questioning the very foundation of Islam. Things got worse when the religious leaders at the mosque learned of what I was sharing. I was called to a meeting, where the imam and other community leaders tried to correct me. They told me that what I had experienced was, at best, a test from Allah, and at worst, an attempt by Shaitan to lead me astray. I should ignore these delusions and return to the normal practice of my faith. But how could I ignore something so life-changing? How could I forget the clarity with which I saw my life and the emptiness I perceived in my religious practice? It was not something I could simply erase from my memory, yet I was warned to remain silent. "For the good of the community," they said, "it is best that you say no more about this." I knew what that meant. My voice was being silenced. The rejection from the community, while painful, didn't completely shake me. I knew that sharing my experience would be met with resistance, but the isolation was hard to bear. What hurt most was watching my wife struggle to reconcile her faith with what I was saying. She couldn't understand why I was straying from what we had always believed to be the truth. But I knew that following this new path was something I couldn't avoid. The truth had found me, and now I had to live it, even if it meant being rejected. After distancing myself from the Muslim community, I began to seek other ways to understand what I had experienced. It wasn't that I was looking for a new religion, but I felt that I needed a space where I could explore spirituality more deeply, without the rigid confines of the dogmas I'd been taught. It was then that I found a small spiritual group in New York City, made up of people of different faiths. There, the focus was not on religion itself, but on connecting with the divine through love and compassion. At first, I felt a little out of place. These people didn't follow any particular religion, but they spoke about their spiritual experiences with a freedom I had never known before. Little by little, I began to share my story, and to my surprise, I was met with understanding and empathy. They weren't there to judge, but to listen and support. This was the kind of environment I needed, a place where spiritual pursuits were more important than rituals or rules. It was in this group that I began to heal my spiritual wounds. The weekly meetings became a sacred space for me, where I could meditate, reflect, and share my doubts and discoveries. There, I understood that what Allah showed me during my NDE was not a punishment, but an opportunity for redemption. I was not being punished, but rather invited to see beyond the rules and dogmas, to understand the true essence of faith. Love. One of the most significant moments of this healing process occurred during one of the group meditations. I remember feeling a deep sense of peace, something I hadn't felt since my near-death experience. It was as if, in that moment, I was being welcomed back into the light that I had seen on the other side. The presence of Allah was there, not as a judge, but as a loving and compassionate force, reminding me that true faith is much simpler than I had imagined. This spiritual community helped me see that I was not alone. Many others were on similar journeys, questioning their long-held beliefs and seeking a deeper connection with the divine. Together, we found strength in each other. With each gathering, my soul grew stronger. I felt like a part of me was finally healing, a part I didn't even know was so wounded. I knew the path I had chosen would not be easy, but the inner peace I began to feel reassured me that I was on the right path. The rejection from the Muslim community was still painful, and my wife continued to struggle with what I was experiencing. But within me, something new was being born. My faith was no longer an obligation, but a choice based on love, compassion, and the pursuit of truth. As time passed, the inner transformation I was experiencing began to manifest itself in outward ways. I felt a growing need to share what I had learned, not just about my NDE, but about what it means to live a life of true faith. I began to realize that my journey was not just mine. There were many other people going through similar spiritual crises, feeling the same emptiness that I had felt before. I decided that my mission would be to help these people. I used some of my financial success to open a community center in New York City, where people of all faiths, and even those with no faith, could come together to discuss spirituality, seek support, and most of all, learn to love. The center was not a new religion, nor a place to proselytize. It was a space to heal, to find meaning, and to reconnect with the divine in whatever way one understood. At first, the community center was met with skepticism. Some thought I was trying to create a cult or something. But over time, people began to see the value in what we were doing. More and more people began attending the meetings, seeking answers to their own spiritual crises. Many came from strict religious backgrounds, like me, and found it a space to question, reflect, and eventually heal. My wife, who had initially struggled to accept my new vision of faith, began to open up to the possibility that there was some truth to what I was doing. She began to attend meetings, and together we began to rediscover our spiritual relationship. It was no longer based on the rules and traditions we had been taught, but on a deep and sincere connection with divine love. Our relationship changed, but for the better. There was now a mutual understanding, a respect for the path each of us had chosen to follow. Rejection from the Muslim community was still a reality I had to deal with. Many people would never forgive me for questioning Islam as we knew it. But I was no longer seeking the approval of others. The peace I felt within myself, the love I found, was enough. I knew I was on the right path. Today, my life is dedicated to this mission. I have found my purpose, to help others overcome their own spiritual crises and find the true meaning of faith, not through rules or dogma, but through love and compassion. This is the mission Allah has given me, and it is the mission I will follow for the rest of my life. My near-death experience was the event that triggered my transformation, but it was what happened afterward, the process of rejection, healing, and reconciliation, that truly changed my life. The faith I practiced before was a faith of conventions, of rules, of dogma. Today, my faith is simple. It is love. Love Allah, love others, love myself. This is the truth that Allah has shown me, and it is this truth that guides every step I take. I found peace, purpose, and a new life. And most of all, I discovered that true faith is in the heart, not in outward practices.